Hello, and welcome to the Evolved Man Masterclass. Today, I'm super excited to have with me Coach Michael Taylor. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, Benjamin, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Great. Really glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. So, Coach Michael is a speaker, an author, and an entrepreneur. So, tell us a little bit about that mix of all that cool stuff you got going on.
Well, in my heart of hearts, I'm an entrepreneur. I actually started my first company when I was 14 years old. So that's really my heart is being an entrepreneur. And as an entrepreneur, I get to do books, which I'm passionate about. So I have my own publishing company. I also do motivational speaking, and I facilitate coaching programs and workshops, all under the umbrella of Creation Publishing Group.
All right. Amazing. Now, out of curiosity, what was that first business you started at 14?
I was walking down the street and I heard these two guys arguing at this motorcycle shop, and they were fighting because the mechanic didn't want to sweep the floors. So I walked in and I convinced the manager to hire me to clean the floors because the guy didn't want to do it as a mechanic. Right. And that's how I got my first job.
Nice. All right. I was looking for opportunity. I like it.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about the backstory about how you got to where you are, because you've got quite a wide variety of subjects that you speak on, from making adversity your friend to the power of men's groups and this kind of new awakening that we're having with men. But you haven't always been in this place of kind of abundance. So take us back a little bit to where this was born from.
Yeah, let's go back, 25 years or so. And I was living the so-called American dream. I had the house, the wife, the 2.5 kids and all of that. And by society standards, I was pretty successful. And within approximately a 6-year time frame, that dream turned into a nightmare as I went through a divorce, a bankruptcy, a foreclosure, a deep, deep state of depression. And during the darkest period of my life, I received a miracle.
Okay.
I was sitting up late one night, and I was sitting on the edge of my bed and I was looking across the room, and I noticed that all the books on my bookshelf had something to do with making money.
Okay.
And as I looked at those books, this question just popped in my head. And the question was this: Michael, what if you took all the energy and effort you've used in trying to get rich and simply learn how to be happy?
Okay.
And it was that one simple question that literally changed my life in an instant. Something in me shifted. And I recognized that I had been looking for happiness and success out there. Right. And I made a decision that no matter what it took, I was going to figure out how to be happy, because I remembered what being happy felt like as a kid.
Right.
But I realized that it had been a long time since I had felt happy. And so as a result of asking myself that question, I stopped reading books on making money in business. And I started reading books on philosophy and spirituality and personal development. And so I took this deep dive into personal development. And I finally got to a point where I gained the courage to go to therapy.
Right.
And that was the turning point in my life, because as a result of going to therapy, I learned and recognized how a lot of the issues that I was dealing with as an adult came from some experiences that I had as a child. And so it was in that process of healing that I was able to move forward. And so now let's fast forward some 25 years. What I've done is I've taken all the lessons I've learned over the last 25 years or so, and I put them in the form of books and programs to support and empower others to overcome adversity in their lives and to recognize that it is absolutely possible for us to live extraordinary lives.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. It's a great overview of your trajectory. So want to unpack that a little bit for men out there who are currently struggling. What did that feel like before? What do you attribute your struggles to when you were in the marriage that was falling apart, and what did that feel like? And then later, how did you figure out your past was related to that unhappiness?
Well, I'll begin by saying that I think the 3 most difficult words for any man to say is "I need help."
I agree.
And we live in a culture that has stigmatized seeking help as though it somehow makes us weak And unfortunately, most men aren't willing to even ask themselves that question, that do I need help?
Right.
So for me, I believe there are only two things that will cause a man to change. One is pain, and the other is what I call divine discontent. So for me, I was in so much pain, I didn't have a choice.
Okay.
It was either get help or die, period. Now, fortunately for me, I wasn't a drinker, so I didn't drink alcohol. So otherwise, I probably would have drunk myself to death. Or if I were into drugs or something, I know I would have self-destructed. So that was the saving grace for me.
Right.
But my addiction was workaholism.
Okay.
It wasn't until that pain got to that level that I had to change that, as I mentioned, that's what spurred on that question about being happy. And so intuitively, I recognized that I needed to do something different with my life. And so, as I mentioned, I jumped into reading books on psychology and philosophy, and I tried to figure it all out in my head.
Right.
But I realized that I was making a lot of progress. I could talk about and rationalize concepts and things, but there was something deeper that I needed to address. And so that's why going to therapy was the door that really opened for me, because what it did was it allowed me to get in touch with my heart. It allowed me to connect with my feelings. And that is the part of myself that I had neglected. And it wasn't until I did that healing work that my life really began to change.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of want to underscore that because and I want to get back to divine discontent because I haven't heard that term before, but I instantly identify with it. But, for myself, I was discontented for many years throughout my 20s and used drinking and drugs as a way to kind of suppress that. And it was only until I started on that path for help, first with therapy and then with coaching to put me in the right trajectory. So I just want to underline that fact that seeking help is the first key to opening up so many doors. And while it is hard for men to do it, it is life-changing.
Absolutely. And actually, whether you realize it or not, if you're watching this video, you're in some way seeking help, which is awesome. The fact that you're tuned into this program right now lets me know that you're the type of person that are open to change, and that's where it all begins.
Definitely. So let's talk a little bit about divine discontent. Unpack that a little bit, please.
Well, we've all had that internal feeling that something's just not right. We may have the success, we may have the money, we may have the women, we may have all the stuff, but there's something that gnaws at us that as men, we don't have a word for, but we feel it, but we don't know how to express it. And I think a lot of us will suppress it and not talk about it, but there's just internal knowing, which I believe is our intuition. And I think as human beings, we have connection or access to what I call the divine source. You can call it whatever you want to call it.
Right.
We have a connection to the source. And that source, I believe, is what that intuition is. It's that part of us that recognizes that we were made for more and life is supposed to be deeper and more fulfilling and rewarding. And we have this emptiness inside that we keep trying to fill with stuff.
Right.
I believe that divine discontent is simply the universe's way of knocking on our souls and saying, look, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you some wake-up calls because you were designed to do more. So for me, my wake-up call was my divorce because I had that feeling for a long time that something was off and my life just wasn't right, but I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know what to say about it. I didn't know how to talk to people about it.
Right.
The universe said, look, you're not getting it. You were put on this planet to do something bigger. And so I got to take drastic measures to get your attention. Wham, divorce. Slapped me upside the head. I said, oh, I get it. I need to do something different. And what I needed to do different was to begin my inward journey, to discover and wake up to who Michael Taylor really was. And that to me, again, was as painful and difficult as it was the absolute best thing that ever happened to me because it put me on the journey to becoming happy with my life, happy with myself, and discovering who I really am as a human being.
All right. Yeah, I definitely identify with that divine discontent and agree that power of intuition is often so much suppressed in terms of our desire for external validation, and we forget to get that internal validation, and we're just not tuning into that signal. But when we ignore that signal, it comes out sideways, and it comes out in weird ways until we can, open up that channel. And I think, like you said earlier, you need to get rid of some of those bad programming from your youth to be able to really hear that channel well.
And here's the challenge for men, because we live in a culture that conditions us that we aren't supposed to feel. See, we process pretty much everything from the neck up as men. That's just the male conditioning of our culture. But what happens is when we allow ourselves to get to our hearts, because our hearts are the doorway to our souls, I believe. And so when we allow ourselves to feel, intuition is, to me, a feeling. It's an inner knowing that you can't explain in your head. You just know. You just intuitively know. And if you aren't connected to your heart, if you aren't connected to your inner essence, you won't feel and experience that intuition. You won't connect to the divine. And so I think that's why it's so important for us as men to be willing to get in touch with how we feel, because feelings are the language of the soul. And when we learn to listen to that, then we have access to everything that we want in life.
Right. And I think in many ways that is the true masculine power, and it's true human power, being able to fully access that and be able to acknowledge and act on that, as opposed to doing something else based on somebody else's agenda.
Right. Being true to ourselves is the key. And that's part of the process of waking up to who we really are. All
right. I know we were talking before we hit record, and let's take it from the past all the way to the present. And we've got, an awakening going on in general. And we were talking about what's happening with men in the media today, the Me Too movement. Talk a little bit about what you think is going on there.
Yeah. And on the outside, it appears that, we're seeing men behaving badly. And the assumption might be that all men are just really bad guys. And in no way do I want to discount some of the negative acts that some of these men have perpetuated, especially among women. But it is my belief that what we're seeing is actually a breaking down of an old, antiquated masculine paradigm that no longer works.
Right.
In other words, patriarchy is breaking down as more and more women have now moved into the workforce. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't realize that for the first time in this country's history, there are actually more women in the workforce than men. There's also more women graduating from college than men. So I see it as just changing roles. Right. And so I think it's really a good thing, because now men are having to wake up. They don't have a choice, because as women have moved forward and evolved, if you will, a lot of us as men, we're still trapped in those old ways of being and behaving. The good news is, since I've been doing this work for some 20, 25 years, it is absolutely amazing to me the amount of men who are now having this conversation. I remember back in 1995 when I first started writing, and I went to a bookstore, and I was asking myself a simple question: what does it mean to be a man?
Right.
And there weren't any books out there, with the exception of maybe Iron John, and there was a book called Fire in the Belly by Sam Keene and a couple of others, but there were very, very few books targeted specifically to men to support them in creating this new paradigm that I think is occurring. Right. So now, if you look, the fact that we're even having this summit, again, substantiates my belief that men are waking up, because I don't think we have a choice, because I believe in evolution. Right. And I actually believe that there are 5 stages of manhood that we've evolved through. Let me share those 5 stages. First stage, I believe, was what I call the caveman male. So think about it. As cavemen, we had 2 responsibilities: to provide and protect. That was our job. So we'd go out there and fight the dinosaurs and try not to get eaten and bring food back to the family and so forth. So we didn't have language, so we just kind of communicated with hand signals and so forth and so on. Well, the universe
you forgot procreate in there, right?
Absolutely. Got to put that in there. That's what we were designed to do. Well, see, the universe is perfect, in my opinion. So it knew that men had to evolve. So the next stage of evolution is what I call the warrior male, in which we gain language. And we actually came to the conclusion that if you didn't look like me, then I had to fight you or protect myself against you. So then we created wars. And so there was this big chaos because we didn't know how to understand that we were all the same. But the universe kept evolving and says, look, we need to do something different. Well, we evolved from the warrior male to what I call the religious male. And so the religious male came to an understanding that, first and foremost, there was something greater than us in the universe that we had access to. And it is with that understanding that we begin to recognize that, well, just because you look different than I do doesn't mean that we're necessarily different. So the universe sent some spiritual teachers to give us some insights on that whole idea. And then the universe said, okay, so now we've kind of opened our hearts and minds a little bit. Now what's next? So then we evolved to what I call the scientific male. So we went through this process of understanding ourselves. Then we started understanding how the universe worked, and science and math and all these things started coming together. And we recognized that, okay, so we can control a lot of things. So maybe this thing called God isn't responsible. So we can figure it all out in our heads. So our intellects became the primary source of our information.
Right.
But then the universe said, wait a minute, there's more. And here's what I believe is the final stage of male evolution. It's what I call the authentic male.
Okay.
It is men who have come to the understanding and recognition that we have access to divinity. We have access to a part of ourselves that's directly connected to that source, whatever you want to call it. And so as we look at this apparent breakdown in our media about men, I believe it's just men waking up.
Right.
Because that's human evolution. Human evolution says that evolution is simply the process of moving to deeper and deeper levels of complexity. And so to me, when I think about complexity, I think about connecting with that which is greater than ourselves. That's the ultimate connection. And when men get to that place where they do their inner work, connect with their hearts, connect with their souls, then they become agents of change through which the universe moves and radiates through. And ultimately, I think that's our goal, to find out who we really are, connect with the universe, connect with our source, and express our gifts and talents to the world.
All right. So if I'm summing up what you're saying is that we've evolved over the years, and this stage of evolution that we've come to from the intellectual male now needs to evolve to the integrated male that understands the power of source energy. And once he taps into that, he can have greater access to that we're all kind of united as one. And that once we acknowledge that, we can change the world and move forward together.
And that is what the authentic male does. Because when a man does his work, heals his heart, removes the shadows, gets to know who he really is, then there's no separation. I don't see a white guy. I don't see a Hispanic. I see men. I see human beings. And ultimately, that is the goal. When we get to that place of oneness within our own hearts and soul, then that's how we heal the world.
All right. I think it's the work we need to do. I mean, I want to touch on that question about, we've got this kind of patriarchy, and then that's also related to, the warrior dynamic, which you were talking about, with people looking different to one another. I mean, I assume that the same applies to, race relations in our country and other countries today too. How do we accelerate that, right? Because there's so many issues, both for, women in the Me Too movement, with race relations today. How do we accelerate that?
Well, let me give you my perception. This is just Michael Taylor's perception. Now, I mentioned that the universe knows what it's doing, right? And there's this evolutionary process. So if you think about it, in a very short period of time, a lot of things have occurred. A lot of people don't stop to think about this, but when you look at America as a whole, most
Right.
people think right now, as a result of the current president and some of the things that's going on, people assume that race relations are worse than they've ever been. That is not my perception. That's
Right.
not how I see it. And here's why. In my short lifetime, I'm only 57 years old, but in my short lifetime, I've seen this country go from not allowing Black people to vote to voting in a Black president.
Right.
That's 57 years. Now, in the eternality of time, 57 years is just a blink of an eye. Now, this country as a whole, it's only what, 247 years old? The entire country is only like less than 250 years old.
Right.
In that short period of time, look at what we accomplished collectively. Now, what's happening is we have some issues that we've sort of suppressed and haven't really addressed, like race relations, gender relations, and a lot of things that we've kind of pushed under the rug.
Right.
The universe knows. You can't hide this stuff. You've got to bring it all to the surface. And the way that I look at it is, imagine you have a glass of water. And at the bottom of the water, there's this mud, okay? And at the top, it looks clear. So all that stuff is festering down in that mud. Well, what happens is, because of technology, we now see a lot of things that we didn't see before. So what that is you start pouring water into this glass. What it does is it starts to go down and mix that mud up. And all of a sudden it gets kind of dark and murky and it looks chaotic. Well, if you keep pouring water in until it overflows, eventually all that mud comes out and pretty soon it's all gone and it's just a clear glass of water.
Right.
Well, see, I think that's what evolution does. Evolution, or shall I say truth, is pouring in that clear water, pouring in the light, and mixing up all that stuff that makes us uncomfortable, and it looks pretty chaotic, and everybody, of course, our media is going to showcase all the negativity about that experience. But the truth is, truth, as I understand it, is the clear water that's coming in and murking up all the mud, but eventually you keep pouring truth in there, it's going to all get clear. So from my perspective, that's what's happening. All this stuff that's happening with our current presidency, it's just a pouring in of truth. We can't hide behind this stuff anymore. We've got to talk about it. We've got to be willing to change and to grow. And because I believe that there is a divine intelligence that is in control of all of this, I'm so excited I can't contain myself, because ultimately I understand and I believe that this intelligence that created this whole universe knows exactly what it's doing.
Right.
And when I can get into alignment with that and my purpose, then, hey, my life is awesome.
All right. I love it. I love it. And as you were talking about it, I think there's an interesting metaphor between, our country as a unit and a male as a unit, right? I mean, there's some great parts of it, and there's some parts of it that, are scars from being younger. And if you don't deal with things in the right way, it comes out sideways, and that is, abuse of power in many forms. But, once you actually deal with it, then you can go forward in a proper way. So I think, like a man who's struggling with some of his past issues and isn't dealing with it actively, it's similar to a state that we're in now, where it's just trudging up stuff and it looks ugly, but it is part of the process, whether you're actively working on it or not. Like you said, that truth can help evolve it, but sometimes it's not pretty in the process.
Well, what's amazing is that my optimism triggers a lot of stuff in men. Right. Because when I start saying that, man, life is great, but it's like, well, if you haven't done your work and if you haven't addressed your issues, then you may be pointing your finger at this guy don't know what the hell he's talking about. Man, look at my life. This is happening, and how can he say that? Well, you got to understand, I have been through the depths of hell. I was actually homeless for 2 years. I lived in my car for 2 years. Okay. So I've been through the depths of hell. I know what it's like to be in the darkness.
Right.
But I made a commitment. I made a commitment that no matter what it took, I was going to figure out how to be happy. And it was that question that literally changed my life. And what I recognize is that a lot of men that are in men's work, they're still processing everything from the neck up, trying to understand it and figure it all out. But it's not up here. It's in here. So what we've got to get men willing to do is to be willing to, number one, make peace with their past. Because if you don't make peace with your past, it's going to come up and bite you on the behind, and it's going to show up in a lot of different ways. And you're going to be blaming black people. You're going to be blaming the government. You're going to be blaming people without taking responsibility for your own joy and happiness. And ultimately, that's what men's work is all about, I believe. It's about getting to your own joy and happiness. And that's something we don't talk about as men, because we talk about the accumulation of material things, stuff, women, blah, blah, blah. But where the real gas is, where the real joy is in the joy. As men, how many of us feel joyful?
Right.
A lot. So for me, that's the best decision that I made. I made a decision that I just wanted to be happy. And I was willing to do whatever it took to do that. Now, you're talking a 20, 25-year process. So it wasn't easy. I mean,
overnight.
I've probably done every imaginable program you can think of, from the Warrior program to Landmark Forum. I mean, I've done them all. But I had a simple goal: to be happy. And right now, Ben, as I'm speaking to you, I can say without hesitation, I am happier now in this very moment than I've ever been in my life.
All right.
Now, I still have goals and dreams that I haven't fulfilled, but I fulfilled the one commitment that I made to myself, was to just be happy. I've been joyfully married for the past 15 years because I recognized that it was possible for two people to get together and create a great relationship. I've seen it, so I knew it was possible, but I had to be willing to do the work to get to that point where I could create it. And now that I have, and that's amazing.
Nice. That's beautiful. And I respect the path and that you've gotten there, and that it's still an unfolding process.
Absolutely. There's no place to get to. There's just a process of going through, I believe. And so yeah. I live in the question of, how can I be better? How can I be a better human being? How can I be a better husband? How can I be a better father? How can I be a better entrepreneur? I live in those questions all the time, and I'm constantly going back and making sure that there's something that I'm not seeing that may be keeping me from feeling and expressing my true joy.
Right, and glad you brought that up. It's an important point, and I know Tony Robbins is famous for bringing this up. Like a lot of your perception is keyed around the questions that you ask yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
So if you're saying, how long is this marriage going to last, versus how lucky am I to have this woman, those two will totally affect how you act and be. And so those questions that you ask yourself, you have to first become aware of them, because sometimes you're not aware of them, and then start asking yourself better questions that serve you better. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah. And here's something that we need to recognize as men. And this is what I believe. If we don't do our healing work, if we've got negative energy trapped, either negative energy of shame, anger, resentment, all this negative energy, if we have that negative energy trapped in us, it actually dictates how we think.
Right.
Because if that pain is there, we're going to process it through that pain without even being aware of it. So that's why healing work is so important, because for me, I see it from a energy standpoint, because everything is energy.
Right.
And if I'm holding on to negative energy, it festers and it shapes how I think and my perception of the world. Because if I'm willing to do my healing work, then I recognize, wow, life is actually pretty darn awesome. But if I've got all this stuff that I haven't addressed, then I'm going to rationalize it that the world is terrible and so is doing this. And so all these external things we think are controlling our lives, but it's really that negative energy that we haven't dealt with. And so that's why it's so important to do that work, to heal our hearts, to make sure that we aren't carrying wounds from the past, because they will come out sideways in ways that will sabotage our joy and happiness.
Yep. Yeah. It's like that victim mentality, when one doesn't realize that it's not everything else out there. It's this inside that you haven't dealt with that is actually making you be the victim.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So one last point I want to touch on is, I know you espouse the power of men's groups in terms of helping men evolve. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like and how men can get involved, and the power that you've seen from that?
Well, interestingly enough, I was sitting up one day and I saw this documentary on TV about this program. And then in this documentary, I saw all these old white guys out in the woods, and they were banging drums. They were just talking about going through divorce. And it was amazing. As I watched the documentary, I said, I can relate to these guys. Now, here I'm a black guy looking at these old white dudes in the woods, but there was something they were saying that I connected with.
Right.
And I think that speaks to the commonality of men. And so as I watched the documentary, I said, you know what? I don't know what that is, but I want to do that. Whatever that is they're talking about. And this is how the universe works. After watching that documentary, I went to the grocery store and I pulled out a basket. I'm going to walk through the grocery store. And as I pushed the little thing up forward in the basket, there was a pamphlet for the New Warrior Training Program in that freaking basket. Now, I don't believe in accidents. Everything happens for a reason. So right. I put the pieces together real quickly. I said, oh man, I'm supposed to do this thing called the New Warrior Training Program. So I signed up, I did the program, and what I learned through the process is I had been doing some speaking and some co-ed stuff for a while, but I didn't recognize how disconnected I really felt from men.
Right.
I didn't recognize that, to be completely honest with myself, I really didn't trust men. And so through this process called the New Warrior Training Program, I recognized that I had some healing to do around men. And I recognized that because we live in such a homophobic society, I think it's men, we're afraid to experience true intimacy with other men. Right. We're afraid that we're going to be labeled as gay, and we avoid that at all costs, because that's like the biggest blow to the male ego. But what I learned through this program was the fact that I needed to be able to open my heart and connect with men. That was a piece of me that was missing. And I had hid from that for a very long time. And so through this process, I really learned to connect intimately with other men. And as a result of doing that training, I recognized that a huge part of my purpose in life is to empower men to recognize that, as I mentioned, it's not about the stuff. It's about our hearts. It's about connection. And so that's why I've written 5 books targeted specifically to men. And what I do is, again, I share the lessons that I learned through all these processes. And my hope is that I empower men to come to the understanding that it is absolutely possible for us to live rewarding, fulfilling, and what I would call an extraordinary life. And when I say that, there are some men or some people that think, okay, if you're going to live this kind of life, then you got to give up stuff. And I say, no, you can have as much money, you can have as much stuff, you can have whatever you want, but not at the expense of your soul. Right. And so for me, one of my goals, one of my dreams is I want to be a billionaire. That's a goal that I'm moving towards. But the good news is I'm no longer driven by this sense of inadequacy and shame and trying to get other people's approval. I'm driven by a passion and a love for humanity that's allowing me to create this opportunity. But the point here is that by allowing myself to connect with like-minded men, not only have I created a support system that allows me to move forward, but it allows me to truly connect with all of humanity. Right. And so I think that's what's really important. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning, with all the chaos that we're seeing in our media right now, I believe it's a wake-up call for men to recognize that it's okay for us to connect. It's okay for us to open our hearts to others and to understand that the world's not as bad as we might think. And so my goal is to do what I can to help facilitate heaven on earth. And I do that by empowering people to reach their full potential.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. To the Warrior Training Project, I've got another guest that's going to be on the podcast that's from the Mankind Project. So we're going to be doing a deep dive of that as part of the summit. So I'm excited about that. Nice. And, I want to highlight what you're saying about connection, because connection is so important for us as humans, and for us to be able to, both have our significant others, our partners, as well as, our own tribe, that connection and nurturing that connection is so important for our well-being and growth, and having a safe place to be able to express your true self is so beneficial in the journey. So love everything that you're saying, and I think it's a good place to land the plane. So where can people find you? And I know you've got a free gift for our listeners today.
Yeah, the simplest way to find me is at coachmichaeltaylor.com. And so if you've been intrigued by this conversation and you want to learn more about the 5 stages of male evolution, and also talk about, the 5 illusions of manhood that drive most of our negative behavior, and I talk about what I call the 5 masks of masculinity, and they're all contained in this amazing book that I put together called The New Conversation with Men. And for your audience, I'd love to offer a free copy of A New Conversation with Men. So they'll have a link. I'm sure you'll put up a link somewhere, Ben, that they can access it. But the book is actually, again, part of my journey.
Yep.
And also based on a radio show that I've done for years. And I actually did a television show, a cable television show, in which I brought men on, and we simply had the same type of conversation we're having now.
Right.
Conversations with depth, conversations that connect us to our hearts. And so for those who are interested, there's the free gift for you. It's my gift to you, in hopes that you understand that it's time for a new conversation with men, in which we empower men to live extraordinary lives.
Awesome. It's time.
It's time. It's time.
All right. Well, really appreciate your time and sharing your knowledge and your heart with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, Ben, let me throw this one thing out. I want to acknowledge you, because it takes a lot of energy, effort, and heart to do this type of thing. So let me acknowledge you for the work that you're doing and bringing us together to share this information, because that's how we're going to change the world. So namaste to you, my friend. Congratulations. You're doing a great job.
I appreciate it. Well, it was great connecting with you, and look forward to connecting again with you soon.